I got to turn it upside down or I won't be able to hook it to my shirt. All right, I think we're ready to go. As you probably heard, the lesson for tonight is Moses and the burning bush. And of course, the thing that's running through everything is God has a plan for us even when we doubt. Moses, we know from what you learned last night, I guess, and what we've learned all our lives, that Moses was taken out of the Nile River by the daughter of Pharaoh. His name actually means taken out. I guess she thought that was the thing to do, was just name him as she found him. His family consisted of two other siblings that we are aware of. We have Miriam, who was roughly 12 years old when he was put into the river, and Aaron, who was approximately 3 years old when these things came to pass. We know that shortly after Moses was born, that the Pharaoh decreed that all the young males of the Hebrews would be killed, because he was forewarned that there was going to be someone coming and taking his place, taking these Egyptians away from him. Well, unable to conceal the baby for long, his mother Jochebed carried out this plan to put him in an ark, if you will. He was about 3 months old, as we understand, when he was set afloat, and we see this in Acts chapter 7 at verse 20. There you'll remember that Stephen was making a speech to the Jews, and he rehearsed many of these things to them in order to let them know where they were, where they ought to be, and some of the things that they had done very wrong. We know that the ark was found by Pharaoh's daughter. It's said that Miriam may have been one of her attendants. Now, I don't think anything in the Bible tells us this, but that comes to us through history. And of course, she was right there when the baby was taken out of the water. Pharaoh's daughter, of course, was not having the baby, so she couldn't feed the baby, so they had to find someone. And of course, they got his mother to nurse him and to raise him for the better part of his life. Moses grows up taught and trained in the things of Pharaoh's court and of the wisdom of Egypt. We know that Egypt was probably the most sophisticated, if you will, of the countries of the world. They had medical things that we didn't have anywhere else. Even some things have been found in archaeological digs that prove that they even did brain surgery. But he was instructed, according to Acts 7:22, in all of the wisdom of the Egyptians, and he was mighty in words and deed. Now, the thing about it is we find it kind of unusual that one such as Moses, he was a Hebrew. There was no doubt that Pharaoh's daughter knew this, and of course he was raised as an Egyptian, and that didn't give him any privileges really other than being recognized as who he was. When he was growing older, he had to escape punishment again because of his murdering an Egyptian taskmaster. He knew that he was a Hebrew, and he knew that this man that was the taskmaster was an Egyptian, and that the man he was beating was someone of his brethren. He was accepting the fact that he was a Hebrew. And therefore, he murdered this man and then hid him in the sand and takes a journey. He goes away from the place that he is and travels to a place where he finds a man named Jethro. And he joins Jethro's family. This was something that was, I guess, foreseen by God. He spends 40 years in Egypt, and now he has come here to be a shepherd for 40 years until he goes back to talk to Pharaoh yet again. The circumstances that he was put into, we might wonder, why? Why was he going to spend 40 years out here in the middle of nowhere tending sheep? One author has suggested that he most certainly had to talk to sheep and had to be with the sheep because of the kind of people he was going to be leading out of Egypt. They were unlearned. They were very stiff-necked. And probably it's been said that maybe one of the dumbest animals in the world is a sheep, that they can be behind a bush and the shepherd can be here and they're totally lost. They don't know anything about anything. Well, we know that these Jewish people that were being led out of Egypt were people that had at least a rudimentary understanding of Jehovah God, that he was the God of everything. Now, as we see around us, all of these gods that have been portrayed here for us, we know that the Egyptians had thousands, just about a god for everything. And therefore, it was impossible to grasp that. It was impossible to worship all of those gods because there were so many of them. And I guess the mindset of the Egyptians, like the mindsets of almost all pagan civilizations, was that you have to try to keep those gods placated. You have to keep them happy. And you can only imagine how these people, these Jews who were in the under the control of the Egyptians, could feel about all of these many gods. They had been taught that there was only one God. And we know that this is what they had taken into there with, they were in their land, and when they had to go to Egypt, that they took their religion with them. And so we think that they were at least understanding the idea of Jehovah God. Moses then spends this time out here herding the sheep and doing everything else. But we know that he did find a wife here, Zipporah, and he had children here. And so we might think that he's become quite satisfied, if you will, with the life that he had. Because, first of all, he wasn't lonely. He was there among other people. His family was there. And there was everything that he needed there. Food, clothing, shelter. He had a job. But the one thing that we need to recognize is that Moses didn't have anything. He didn't own anything. Everything that he had belonged to his father-in-law. He might have herded those sheep, but they weren't his. Now, he was going to come into a time when he was going to have to herd the Jews as they left, the Israelites. They didn't belong to him. He wasn't raised up by them. And so there has to be some things that change about Moses in order for him to do the job that God has chosen him to do. And that's what we see in what's being studied tonight, and that is Moses and this burning bush. We notice that the miracle here is one that I guess we've never really understood. It seems a very small thing that God could cause a bush to burn and not to be consumed. God can do anything. But of course, we notice that some people believe that the bush was not really on fire as we believe it, and I don't think it was, but that at this particular time we find God and this bush occupying the same space. That this bush is there, and God has given his demonstration of power through that particular bush. We know that some believe that this burning bush was really Jesus, Several people that I read on this thought that it was Jesus himself there, because we have to remember that Moses is in the presence of God, and it seems a little peculiar if we would think of one of God's created creatures, an angel, being there and being thought of and called God, that it wasn't God himself. A theophany, the appearance of God to man in so many ways. So Moses sees the bush there on the mountain, and it draws his attention, as it would anybody's, I suppose. And therefore he says, I've got to turn aside, I've got to see this. I want to see what this thing is all about. And so he gets there, and he's told immediately to take off his shoes, take off his sandals, because he's standing on hallowed ground, because again, God is there. So God is now going to take over, telling Moses what he needs to do, what he needs to understand about this great job that he's going to have him to do. And therefore, Moses comes here, and from the very beginning, Moses is not comfortable being there in the company of God. Now, I mean, who of us would be? If we had this theophany of God appearing to us in some way, maybe a burning bush or some other way, we might feel a little bit uncomfortable being in the presence of God. And Moses most assuredly was. Here he thought they've chosen someone that is inadequate, somebody who is very unlikely to carry out this mission, because I am nothing but a shepherd. Now Moses had left behind all of this learning and understanding that he had back there in Egypt. He had probably given all of that up, thought that was something that would never help him, never be of any use to him. And he had taken up the way of a shepherd. And now he's being called to get these Israelites out from under the most mighty ruler in the world. We're not sure, and I'm not sure, that the bush was actually giving off heat. You know, we think if it's burning that it's going to be some heat there. But I don't particularly think that it was. We don't see that Moses is shying away from the bush because there's a terrible heat there. But again, we notice that this is just something showing the presence of God. This is called the Shekinah. When we see the Shekinah mostly in the New Testament and in the Old, I guess, predominantly, this was the appearance of God at the mercy seat on the Ark of the Covenant. You'll remember the Ark of the Covenant had the wings of the cherubs going up to a point. Well, between where they met and the bottom of the Ark was a glow. There was a presence there that people could see, and it demonstrated that God was there with the Jews, there in the tabernacle, there in the temple, and they were very much impressed with that. Now, not many people, I guess, got to see that, because the Ark of the Covenant, being in the Holy of Holies, was not, there was only one person that went in there, and he only went in there once a year. But I dare say when he came out, he probably discussed with people what he saw and what was there. That God is with us because I have seen the demonstration of God here in the holy seat. So we notice in Exodus chapter 7 at verse 7, says that Moses was 80 years old and Aaron was 83 when they spoke to Pharaoh. So here's Moses, 80 years old, with Aaron with him, and he was 3 years older. In Acts chapter 2, verse 23 and 30 says, when he was 40 years old, he decided to visit his own people, the Israelites. And 40 years had passed. The angel appeared to him in the wilderness on Mount Sinai in the flame of the burning bush. So something that we notice here is that indeed Moses was out here, herding, whatever you want to call it, but it would seem that the very mountain that he is going to see this demonstration of God's power was not only Mount Horeb, but it was also Mount Zion. It was actually the same place. We notice when Moses is taking the children of Israel out of Egypt that they do in fact come to this particular mountain. Now that's something that people get from putting two and two together, I guess, but that's what we find here. Now, when Moses is there with this bush, we know that he is, again, he's flabbergasted by what he's seeing, but then he gets even more upset by what is presented to him. Notice the first thing that Moses did to show his doubt is that he was expressing his personal inadequacy. Now, again, I said that he left those things behind that he had learned in Egypt and was now looking at himself as just a shepherd. But he was probably one of the best educated people around there to do what God is wanting him to do. And yet, he doubts his own adequacy. In Exodus chapter 3 at verse 11, Moses says to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" It reflects a deep personal inadequacy and fear of failure. What if I go there and he just says no? Well, God tells him he's going to say no. He prepares him for what's going to happen. You're going to ask him to let these people go, and he's going to say no. Then we're going to work on him, and we're going to have these things done. So, doubt number one, I am not personally the person you need. I'm not adequate enough. Then, second doubt, Moses is concerned about the lack of authority and credibility that he has in going to the Israelites. Now, you'll remember the Israelites, while he's 40 years away in Midian working as a shepherd, Israelites are still back there in Egypt under the taskmasters and doing the many things that they were doing as slaves. And now he has some doubt, who am I to go before these people and say, y'all follow me out of here? Now, he did not, as far as I know, tell the Israelites who he actually was. I don't think he went in there and said, I was taken out of the bulrushes in the river, and I was Pharaoh's son or his daughter's son, and I ruled in Egypt right along with them, and therefore I was partially committed to your slavery. And so he felt, why would they follow me? And I guess that might be the question for all of us. Why would they do what I tell them? Well, we know that the highlights of his fear were dismissed by God because God was going to give him some adequacy here. In Exodus chapter 3, verses 12 and 13, it says, "And God said, But I will be with you, and this shall be a sign before you, that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain." So right here where he was, looking at the burning bush, is again where he's going to get a lot of information from God. Then Moses said to God, "If I come to the people of Israel and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' what shall I say to them?" Well, what was he going to say? Well, God gives him the answer in verse 14. God replied and said, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me. Now, we've looked at that particular phrase probably all of our lives and thought that's the most peculiar thing. But the idea is God always has been, God always will be, and therefore God is I am. We speak of ourselves in past tense many times, when I was a child or when I was in high school or these type things. But when we think about God's past, God has such a past that he can't describe it for us to understand it. I have always been. Before there was anything, I was. Before you, I was. And after you, I'm going to keep being. And therefore, he describes himself in a way that makes sure that Moses is talking to these Israelites about somebody that is all-powerful, all-knowing, and they're going to have to follow. Because this is really their only chance. If they don't take this chance of leaving with Moses, they'll never leave. Because the Israelites are already very leery of them. You'll notice that Pharaoh had all of the young children killed. That was, of course, to try to ward off such an enormous amount of people that were slaves. We can only imagine what would happen if there were a slave rebellion. Some have estimated that there were probably more slaves than people. Egyptians, I guess I should say. The slaves were people. But the idea was that they were increasing at such a phenomenal rate that the Egyptians were becoming very leery. These people could cause us great problems. And therefore, that was part of the reason that these young men were killed too, is kill them so they are not overrunning the place. Now you might think, well, it was just a natural thing for the Egyptians to have children. I think it was, but I think also that the hand of God even was in that. I think his providence in multiplying these Israelites was something that was going to be foreboding to the Egyptians, and that might help them let them go. So Moses is going to be, I'm not worthy of this. And then how are they going to follow me? Or why would they follow me? Well, then Moses comes upon the third doubt that he has. And that's the fear of rejection. Many times some of the things that we're asked to do on the job, at school, anywhere we might be at church, there may be someone that asks us to do something, and we are simply fearful of rejection or failure, and that's exactly what Moses was facing here. Moses doubted that the Israelites would listen to him, that he was going to have to tell them something extra special to get them to follow after him, and therefore, in Exodus 4:1, says, what if they do not believe me or listen to my voice? For they may say, the Lord has not appeared to you. Now, we can't blame him much for this. If I came to you and I said, the Lord has appeared to me and he's told me thus and such, you would ridicule me. You would say I was crazy. You'd say, well, that ain't going to happen. And of course, we understand that if the Lord appeared to me and told me to do the same thing that the Bible tells me to do, that's a bit redundant. I wouldn't need to say God has appeared to tell me these things, because all we have to do is take people to his word and show them, here's what he says. Of course, these people didn't have that luxury. They were having to listen to Moses, and they were going to have to understand what he said, and he was going to have to get over the fear of them saying no. And that's a big thing. A lot of people, you might ask them to teach a Bible class, and they'll say, no, I can't do that. But, and of course, we know that one of the, or if not the greatest fear that people list is getting up in front of a group of people and talking. I never had that problem. I was blessed that way. My wife says I talk too much. She says, did you know that lady at the checkout? And got no idea who she was. We were talking. But I'm outgoing, I guess. But we noticed that Moses was going to have to be concerned enough about what was happening, that something's going to happen in order for him not to be rejected. We read that in Exodus chapter 4, verses 2 through 7. The Lord said to him, "What is that in your hand?" He said, "A staff." And God said, "Throw it on the ground." So he threw it on the ground, and it became a serpent, and Moses ran from it. But the Lord said to Moses, "Put out your hand and catch it by the tail." So he put out his hand and caught it, and it became a staff again. That they may believe that the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, hath appeared unto you. Then he had this particular sign. But the Lord continued. He says, "Put your hand inside your cloak." He put his hand inside his cloak, and when he took it out, behold, his hand was leprous like snow. Now, leper and leprosy was one of those things that you said that people, they would quake. It's kind of like cancer today, I guess, and probably even worse, because we do have some treatments. There wasn't anything short of a miracle that was going to get you out of this. But now, here's Moses standing there with a leprous hand. Okay. Then God said, "Put your hand back in your cloak." He put his hand inside his cloak, and when he took it out, behold, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. So here are two miracles that Moses can do at a moment's notice. He can throw down his staff, it'll become a serpent. Or he can take his hand inside his coat and it will become leprous. That would certainly get his attention, or anybody's attention. So we know that God then continues to reveal his plan to Moses. God wanted Moses and the people to know that he was a living God, that he was the eternal God, that he was immediate and present right there with them. He was going to rescue them from their slavery. This had never been offered before. And I dare say there wasn't anybody big enough, if you wanted to use that term, to do that. But God reveals his plan to Moses about what's going to go on. So we get to doubt number 4, a speech impediment. In Exodus chapter 4, verses 10 through 13, said, "But Moses said to the Lord, O my Lord, I am not eloquent, either in the past or since I have spoken to you, to your servant, but I am slow of speech and of tongue. Then the Lord said unto him, Who has made man's mouth? Who makes him mute? Who makes a deaf, or seeing, or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be with your mouth, and teach you what you shall speak. But he said, O my Lord, please send someone else." Now this is not only a doubt, it's a dodge. How many times have we been asked to do something and we say, "Well, can't you just get someone else? Isn't there someone better qualified than me?" And then he starts talking, "But I just can't talk. I'm slow of speech." Now, whether that was a real thing or not, I'm not sure. But there seems to be some measure of reality here, because despite the signs that he was given, and despite his reluctance, God said, "I'll do this. I will appoint Aaron to be your spokesman. He will speak to the people for you, and it will be as if it were coming from your mouth, and as if your God were with him." So now Moses doesn't have to talk. Doesn't have to make a speech, I guess is what I'm saying there, because what happened was God told Moses, Moses told Aaron, and Aaron told the people. The arrangement was addressing Moses' concern about his speaking abilities and provided him with a partner. So you see, what's happening here is every doubt that Moses has, God comes back with, look what's going to happen. Look what I'm going to do. And of course, that encourages him. But Moses' doubts and God's signs to serve him in this particular way were definitely a divine empowerment. Nobody else could do these things. They illustrate that God equips those who he calls, addressing human weaknesses with his strength. I think we all maybe have experienced that there's been something that someone wanted us to do, or something even that we wanted to do, and we felt that we just couldn't do it, but we gave proper time to consideration and prayer, and we could do it. We did it. This illustrates God's strength through us. Through these events, God affirmed his commitment to do for Moses what was necessary to get those Israelites out of Egypt. And we notice that he did exactly that. He did go to the people. They didn't want to accept him at first. And of course, they did exactly what God said, who sent you? And he told them. They talk about not understanding why he would be the one. Who are you? And they quiz him about his background. And of course, he has a Jewish background just like they do. And therefore, he can give them that. I believe his mother did a lot of teaching during the time that they were together, that she taught him so much about the background that he had in the Jewish nation, and she could well do that. She was his mother, so she could explain the genealogy to him, and the Jews were very hip on that. They wanted genealogies. So, when we notice all of this, we know that Moses did exactly what God had instructed him to do. He had fought against it, but nonetheless, God convinced him, and he went out and did it. So what does this mean for us? What's the practical application here? Well, first of all, God doesn't keep us in a comfortable space all the time with easy things to do. Instead, he's more concerned about our growth and our obedience. Many times the things he wants us to do, we may not be very good at. But if it's something that we feel that we need to do, and something that God would be pleased if we did it, then I think we have to buckle up and do it, and just know that God is with us. That's one of the first things that God responds to Moses. I am going to be with you. For us also, God responds to Moses' uncertainties with, I am who I am. But shortly after that, God warns Moses that not everyone's going to believe him. They're not. That doesn't make this calling any less. It doesn't make him any less important, because he's going to be dealing with those sheep. He's going to have to convince them. Even though it may not be an easy task, and there are a lot of uncertainties, again, God gives him what he needs in order to accomplish that. Because we always look instead to the one who is I am. When we have something that we're uncertain about and we're not sure about, and let me preface that with this, that there is nothing wrong with doubting things. There's nothing wrong with Moses necessarily doubting who was talking to him. That didn't happen every day. But the idea is, in our place, if we have doubts, then we have to work on figuring those doubts out. There may be other people who can help us take care of our doubts. There's not going to be a miraculous answer to it, because we know God doesn't work in that fashion anymore. But if we have doubts, we have to move to figure them out. And here, what better place did Moses have than simply talking to God, telling God about it. God knows all the answers. He knows all the whys and the wherefores. And therefore, Moses was doing exactly what he needed to do. If he had just said, well, let's go, and then had become doubtful and hesitant down there in front of the Egyptians, that wasn't going to get them to follow him. So he had to accept these things. What if they do not believe or listen to me? The Lord says that this or that. Well, the same thing's true with us today. There are people that will not believe what we're telling them. Most of the time that may be in the realm of religion. We have people around us always that have varying degrees of religion, from nothing to, well, whatever the other end is. Some people are so fanatical and think that so many things are different than what they are that they won't listen to what, we got to tell them. When I was in college, I was meeting with some people, and we were talking about things religious. And one of the guys in the group said, well, I had something to happen to me the other day that it threw me back. And, of course, we wanted to know what it was. He said, I was studying with a girl. We were studying, and I was telling her all these things from the Bible and teaching her points from the Scriptures and all of that, and she stopped him. And he said, yes. He thought he was going to get a great question. And she simply said, I don't believe the Bible. Well, he started too far in. We have to know who we're talking to, because if we're trying to tell them chapter and verse for what they ought to be doing, we've got to know that they believe in what we're telling them. Moses, his miracles wouldn't have done any good if nobody had believed them. They thought, oh, well. And we can't expect people to just believe anything we say without backing it up. And as Christians, we know that we have to do that with the revealed Word. I'm not going to make up something, and we don't need to, because that will unravel quickly. And just as sure as Moses had tried to make up his own answers to these questions, would have been just as sure as he'd fell flat on his face, because he would not have answered nor proceeded to make these Israelites understand like God knew what it would take for these Israelites to understand. We got to lean on what God has revealed. We may not come across as the most eloquent people or learned people, but if we're speaking the Word of God, then we are eloquent. We are learned. We don't have to push our own ideas on people. We simply tell them what God says. And we remind ourselves, as God reminded Moses, I will speak for you. I will tell you what to say. I'll put my words in your mouth. The same thing happens to us. God puts His words in our mouth through our study and our learning of the Word. And therefore, it doesn't matter if we're not as eloquent as a lot of people might be. If we have that Word, it is powerful. It is powerful for us, and it's powerful for those people who are around us and hear us, see us. And then lastly, although it seems like God sent Aaron to do what Moses could have done, he was going to do the talking, but God said in verse 15 that He would help both of them speak. He's going to give Moses what to say, and He's going to help Aaron doing the talking. It's just that He's going to, and that wasn't an unusual thing. A lot of times kings and higher officials didn't talk to the lowly peasants. They would tell someone else and they'd tell them. So it wasn't anything out of the ordinary, I don't believe. God knows what we need before we ask for it. Moses didn't have to say, I can't talk. I'm kind of fumbled-mouthed, because God already knew that. And you'll notice that God already had an answer for it. Everything that Moses came up with a doubt for, God had an answer for it. if you don't think that you're good enough to do this, then I'm going to give you some powers that are going to show people that you are from me, and I'm telling you what to say. God never asked Moses to do anything that he wasn't ready to help him do. Again, doubts, that's okay. But when God showed Moses these things and told Moses what was going to happen, then Moses eventually wound up to be the great leader that he was. There are others that we can depend on to help us with any kind of problem that we have. Just like Moses depended upon Aaron, we can depend on others within the congregation or outside the congregation. Depend on people to help us know what's right and what to do when we come upon problems that might be most unusual. Now we know that Moses used his powers before Pharaoh. He threw down that staff and it became a serpent. Pharaoh was not impressed. So what? Guys, throw yours down here. They throw down at least 2 more, and they became serpents. Now, don't ask me how they did that. I have no idea. But the miraculous thing about it is Moses' serpent ate them. He ate the others. What a show of power. This is what I can do with this staff, and you can do the same thing, but mine are going to consume yours. Now, whatever serpent means, there are people that believe that the word serpent can be translated as crocodile. And, it doesn't really matter. If Moses threw down a crocodile and they threw it down, he ate them both, it's the same thing. But the word serpent is there. And generally, when we think of a serpent, we think of a snake. I don't say, well, a serpent is a crocodile. But we know that Moses used the power that God gave him to overcome the things that he was doubtful about. And we have to believe that if we know God, if we're a baptized believer, if we're a Christian, then we have to realize that God is going to help us. He's going to help us overcome anything that comes our way. And again, if we can't overcome it by ourselves, there are people that will help us do exactly that. So we don't have to go into anything doubtful, even though, again, you might be a bit hesitant, but, be thoughtful about what God is asking you to do. And I think that you will find that there's nothing that God has ever asked us to do that is impossible. We think about the plan of salvation and how simple it is, but how hard it is as well. God could have given us some Herculean task to perform to become a Christian, but he didn't. He said, you're going to have to believe what I say. You're going to have to repent. Now, that's not always easy, but it's something that we strive to do. You're going to have to confess. You're going to have to be baptized. And a lot of people think the baptism is the one thing that keeps a lot of other people from becoming Christians. But think about the simplicity of it. To be baptized in water, almost everywhere we can find water to baptize people in. It's nothing that we have to, go on some kind of great trek to find. And we make that possible even within our own buildings. So it's not something that can't be done. It's not something that's already prepared. It's something that we can do. So what we want to think about in all of this is that God provides and we respond. We may not be able to respond like the guy next to us, but we respond. We do what we can with what we have. God is never going to ask us to do anything that we don't already have the ability to do. We can increase our abilities. We can work on our abilities. We can improve. But it doesn't mean that on the outset that we're going to have to say, well, Lord, wait a minute. hold off. These Jews weren't getting any better. Their treatment wasn't getting any better. They weren't getting any younger. And therefore, to put off what God wanted him to do was leaving a lot of people in dire straits. Had to be done at once. Therefore, God planned it. God orchestrated it. God picked the right man. And he gave them the tools with which to do that which he was given to do. And we have to believe that God is doing exactly the same thing for us. We don't think that God is providing for us, or we don't think God has provided for us, then we're one step back. We need to change the way of thinking. The examples that we have in the Bible are not just there for young children to sing about. They're there for our learning. And Moses is one of the greatest examples that went from somebody to nobody to somebody again. And that last somebody was the worker for God. The leader that led the Israelites out of Egyptian bondage and set them up with a new religion, if you will, one that they knew about, learned about, and could practice. Well, here we are, a bunch of years later, and we're trying to do exactly the same thing. We're trying to do what God tells us to do in the best way that we can. God help us to have the gumption, the intestinal fortitude, the faith, whatever you want to call it, to do what he says. From first obeying the gospel to being a Christian every day of our lives. Thank you so much for being here. I hope I haven't overstayed my welcome. I didn't hear any screaming kids coming, so I guess that I'm not supposed to be sitting down just yet. But again, thank you for being here.